Joining me today is Alicia Short, a former Sauvage Wellness client who is here to share with you how she overcame the biggest and most common fears and hesitations when it comes to using the sympto-thermal method of natural birth control. When I first met Alicia, she had been on hormonal birth control since high school and was tired of worrying about its impact on her health. She wanted a natural birth control option that didn't alter her hormones. However, she was terrified of unplanned pregnancy, dreading using condoms all the time, and trusting a method that wasn't the hormonal methods that are so commonly used. I'm so excited to have Alicia here today because she so beautifully overcame these initial fears that I see so many women struggling with and has been using the sympto-thermal method of natural birth control successfully for a year now. Alicia, thank you so much for being here. How are you?
Hey, Brandy, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be here. I've been doing well, just adjusting to the cold weather like everyone else every year,
Yeah.
but trying to go into winter with a more positive mindset. How are you? How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. As I was getting ready for our call, I actually went back in some of our work together to see how long it had been since you started learning and using and practicing with this method. And the date on it, I believe, was October 30th, which is tomorrow. So it has been almost exactly 1 year since
Oh,
we first sat down to teach you the method, which is so cool.
I know it definitely does not feel that long.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, I would love for you to take a minute to tell the listeners here on the call a little bit about yourself and what brought you to Sauvage Wellness.
yeah, so like you said, I had been on hormonal birth control since I was actually 15. I'm 25 now, and going back a couple of years, yoga actually brought me to you, and then which in turn brought me to Sauvage Wellness. I really just loved your energy in the class, and of course, found myself on social media, and then your Instagram, and then your blog and website. And first thing I that caught my eye was a post about natural birth control, and I was just blown away. Like I was so intrigued. I had never heard anything like it. Like I'm sure a lot of women, and just after learning that I don't have a cycle, I basically didn't have a cycle or, quote unquote real period, just withdrawal bleed. And was missing out on ovulation altogether and the benefits of it. There was really nothing more I wanted than to have my body do its normal, natural thing. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that I hear from a lot of women is that they're really surprised to learn that they don't have a cycle when they're on hormonal birth control, that that's just not something that's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just different aspects of my life at that time last year, I was really switching to more natural cleaning products, makeup, and this kind of was just a sign of another thing I wanted to explore and get more into.
Yeah. Yeah. So, before learning how to use the symptothermal method of natural birth control, I know you struggled with some pretty big fears and hesitations. What were those early fears that you had, and hesitations, resistance, all that stuff that kind of came up in the beginning?
Yeah, so I think back to our little coffee date, I really just wanted like more information. I wasn't like quite ready to dive and commit to something that big. I definitely wanted some more info, but having known someone close to me actually who had gotten pregnant on birth control, I just really wondered like how I'd be able to prevent pregnancy without Western medicine, and if I'd have the time, if I'd be able to stay on track. Um, and it was really about like trusting myself and my body without synthetic hormones. And at first, I didn't feel like I could trust myself completely, at least. And I also definitely felt resistant to the use of condoms, especially like constantly for the first, few months before my cycle regulated. But, and I just really wasn't a fan overall, like with my past experiences with condoms. But like I'm sure most women feel, I felt hesitant also about talking to my partner about this big change. And I finally just started to look at it as like a leap instead of a risk. And like really like the biggest thing with that was working with you. And like, to be honest, if I did this myself, I would have considered it a risk, uh, especially just like, yeah, not having that professional, individual by my side through it the whole time. So yeah, I definitely just having someone to coach me through it and have you there like 24/7 to send pictures and ask any questions. And as far as the condom use, we really just had to explore a couple different brands and found one that we use now that just like works for both of us. And it's really not as bad as I pictured, besides the like inconvenience of stopping and putting them on. But, it's really worth it in the long run. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I like how you phrase that, where in the beginning, before we work with or we know of fertility awareness instructors, it feels like a big risk to go off the synthetic hormones and to use cycle tracking. But once we have the right resources and supports in place, it really is
Mhm.
taking a leap into what you want versus, being more fear-based, I guess, and not doing something because of the unknown.
Yeah, exactly. And you really helped me with that, not jumping into the unknown. You set it up like super clearly, and I had all the resources and textbooks, and um,
Yeah.
that was awesome. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to hear that. That
yeah,
kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask, which what did allow you to overcome the resistance and the fear and to really feel comfortable using the method?
yeah. So really, the biggest thing was time, and just the more I learned about my own body coming off the pill, the more I felt comfortable because everything you had said may or may not happen definitely happened for me, such as like side ovulation pain, which
Mm.
really wasn't anything too crazy, but it was honestly more exciting for me than anything
Mhm.
because I hadn't felt any sort of pain like that otherwise, besides cramps. And like breast tenderness and increased sex drive and different types of cervical fluid. Like it was all just so exciting to see my body make these changes and get back into its natural thing that I had before birth control, but really like didn't know anything about. So,
Mhm.
and the more I read and talked to you, and learned to track and just how easy it was, the more I then trusted myself and the method. So it all just kind of came together over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love that. Really, like anything we've never done before, the only way we get comfortable doing it is
Yeah.
doing it. Right.
Exactly.
So we
Exactly.
can we can put in the time to read the resources and to do the research, which we should do, and it's what we often do with new things. But
Yeah.
with something like this and with anything new, we get more comfortable the more we practice it, and the more we do it, we
Right.
continue to build that self-confidence and that trust.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And like I said before, like I never felt like, I had to wait till my next call to ask you a question. It was just like, it was great to just, text you pictures and, and not, not
Yeah.
feel like I was being held back by that.
Yeah. Yeah, having support along the way.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So it sounds like for overcoming resistance and fear and getting comfortable with this, kind of the suggestions here are to do the research and
Mhm.
to read the resources, to work with someone who can support us in our learning, and then also to make the leap because we only feel comfortable if we start practicing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So as you became more comfortable with the method, I know you were met with some surprising resistance and pushback from other people, people who were important to you. And so I'm curious how you dealt with that type of resistance.
Yeah. So honestly, at first, not well. I was pretty upset and hurt in different ways that people would doubt me and the method. So I simply just stopped talking about it, and that which was tough in the beginning because I was just so excited. Like it was really all I wanted to talk about. So And plus, like, my friends and families weren't the ones learning it with you along the way, and the ins and outs, and um, everything behind the science behind it. So really, how could they know the details of the effectiveness? And it didn't really matter what I said. It was just kind of like they were kind of stuck in their ways. And you actually said something to me one time that really stuck, and it was a question, and you asked, did I talk about my form of birth control before this with friends and family? And I was like, not really. I mean, and then, you asked, like, so what makes it different now? Like, it can stay a private matter if you want it to, and it can stay between, you and your partner and whoever you really want it to be with. And that really resonated. So while I was excited and full of new information, I really became more selective of who I shared and talked about the method with. And I figured most people I told would have similar reservations that I did in the beginning. So yeah, I finally was just like, you know what? Who cares what other people think right now? And you really also helped me by just reminding me, it'll just take time, and maybe you should look at it as like you're going to show them it works instead of just telling them. So
Mhm.
that was really, and that included my own partner, because he definitely had some reservations.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like, okay, like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to just go through month by month, and the longer I don't get pregnant, the the better it'll be, and it'll make sense. So it really comes back to um, something that's been true in so many aspects of my life during other times of change and stuff, and it's really just time is your best friend. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think something is so important that kind of came up here, and that's that one, because a lot of us don't know this method exists before we show up to something like this, like finding Sauvage Wellness on Instagram or doing the research. Most other people don't know it exists either. And so when we start to talk about it, they have the same reservations and the same fears and
Yeah.
hesitations that we may have had in the beginning that we've worked through. And so they haven't yet worked through
Right.
it, nor are they in a place where maybe they're like even ready to consider it. So we're met with that resistance. And then to really think about the thing that works best at
Mhm.
showing people something works is like showing them that it
Yeah.
works. And so it's while we can tell them the information, like
Mhm.
some of the people that maybe early on were like, Alicia, this is never going to work. You're like, well, obviously it works. It's been a year now.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
they can't, they kind of, it kind of takes away their power of like being a Debbie Downer on this. And I've seen it with a lot of doctors too, where early on they would constantly pressure me to switch to something different and this isn't going to
Uh-huh.
work. And I show up now 7 years later and I'm like, look, if this didn't work,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be sitting here with no
Right.
children.
Right. Exactly. And I just think it speaks to a bigger point of like our society, and if a woman is getting off birth control, that must mean she's ready to have kids.
Hmm.
It's that time. And yeah, it just opened my eyes to like the like maybe not dependency, but really just like people thinking, hormonal birth control is the only wrap,
Mm.
before you're ready to have kids. And if you're not on it, you're must be ready. So it speaks to so much bigger.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of it is the wanting to say that it's closed-mindedness, but really it's lack of education. We're not educated on these methods and we're not
Absolutely.
taught that they exist and we're not taught that they're effective
Mhm.
at preventing pregnancy and that being off of hormonal birth control doesn't mean you want to get pregnant.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as we're coming towards the end here, I'm curious what advice you have for any babes out there who are wanting to make this same switch to using natural birth control, but find themselves feeling nervous about it.
Yeah, so this is a great question. I was thinking a lot about it. But the first point, kind of a little off topic, well, not entirely, but something I find super interesting in the last year. was that the foods you eat really affect your cycle and your period. Um, and it's still something I'm dealing with and kind of working with my doctor, but just really figuring out, what works for me and what makes me feel the best. But I'm still experiencing sometimes, like those painful periods, but it's just like, it's really just like motivating me to try out different things and make some lifestyle changes and diet changes. And um, so, yeah, that definitely, and just, so I guess going back to that, my piece of advice for that is to not like accept painful periods as just being a girl, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've heard that so much, like, oh yeah, it just sucks being a girl. And
Mm-hmm.
just living through those painful periods once a month. So while they're common, that doesn't mean that they have to be a part of your life, and you can have painless periods. So that's definitely something that's just been of interest of mine, and people are really like surprised to hear that. Like, wait, what is the connection there?
Yeah.
um yeah, so then my next piece would definitely be to not listen, going back to what we kind of just talked about, just not listen to the negativity, because more likely than not, these people know very little about the female body and the cycles. So really just um, letting, like I said, letting time tell and show them, what we are able to do by just listening and tracking to the signs our bodies are telling us.
Mm.
Um, and then lastly, I would say, well, second to lastly, I had so many.
I love it.
um, just really like being patient with your body. So it's been, if it had been on synthetic hormones for years, just, be patient. And I definitely struggled with this. Um, but really just like, you could ovulate the first month or you could ovulate the sixth month, but really just like being gentle with yourself. So and then, okay, finally, lastly, just enjoying the wonders of the female body, because it's truly so, so freaking cool.
Mhm.
And I've learned more in the last, year than the 10 years before. And it's amazing how cyclical it is and all the things that affect it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. I'm so glad you shared all of those things. There's so many
Yeah.
good good nuggets in there. And one
Mhm.
thing that I really like to point out, and you were talking about this, is that just because period cramps and having awful periods is common does not mean they're normal. So if we're on hormonal birth control because we have awful periods,
Mhm.
we're just using the hormonal birth control to cover that up because that's what it does. It doesn't actually regulate everything. It just takes away your natural cycle so that you don't have to deal with it. But
Mhm.
if that's the reason we're on hormonal birth control, like it's time to advocate for ourselves and our bodies to actually have periods that don't feel awful, that can feel comfortable and to say, I'm tired of ignoring this and I want to give it my attention. So I love that,
Yeah.
to recognize like just because these things are common doesn't mean we have to be okay with them.
Right. Yeah. And definitely I've had to experiment with a bunch of different things, but month to month, like when I do, I like to say I get surprised by my period. So like, before it would be like, okay, definitely getting it like any moment now because of the heavy cramping. But really, like, it's almost just like, it's such a good feeling with when it's like basically painless. Like it's just like, wow, I really gave my body what it needed this month, or the last few months.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. And being able to use cycle tracking to know like my period is getting close and I'm not experiencing those awful
Right.
symptoms that maybe I did in the past.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Another important thing that you mentioned here is that it takes time, especially for coming off of hormonal birth control, because
Yeah.
if we've been on hormonal birth control for 10 years or a decade or more, that's
Yeah.
just as much time that our body hasn't been ovulating or hasn't been making
Mhm.
its cyclical hormones. So we can't expect overnight for everything to be straightforward or to feel easy and simple, and to recognize that's where working with someone like myself, a fertility awareness instructor, comes in handy because it's going to take time and that's normal. It's fine to give your body the space and time to relearn how to do this process. And like you said, to enjoy how cool and mesmerizing our bodies are that they
Yeah.
can, one, remember to do this after decades of not doing it. And
Exactly.
then how our bodies respond to every little thing like food, to our emotions, to our movements, to our lifestyles, and how we really have so much more control over our menstrual cycles than we think we do.
Exactly. Yeah. Totally. And it was such a cool feeling too to really like start to see those changes and finally see my cycle really get back on track. I can't say it wasn't frustrating, but we definitely worked through it. But I was just really eager to see, that temp rise and that thicker cervical fluid. And it's really just nothing like it if you, especially because we're not, as teenagers, we're not paying attention to those
Yeah.
things, and we're just like, what the heck is this? So it's so cool. It really is.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you were here and so excited that you were able to share your story and your experience and to use what you've learned to help other people and to ease their fears and hesitations as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Brandy. This was awesome.
Yeah, of course. Any final words you want to mention as we're wrapping up?
Really just back to the wonders of the female body. I can't stress it enough. It's just amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Alicia. We'll be talking soon.
Thanks, Brandy.